If Mom meant so much to you, then you can pay for all of it, my sister said as she pushed the funeral home estimate across the table and walked away without looking back. That was the moment I realized grief wasn't going to be the hardest part of losing my mother. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 68 years old when my mother, Dorothy Carter, passed away at the age of 92. She had lived a long life, a life filled with quiet strength, handwritten birthday cards, Sunday dinners, and a stubborn independence that lasted almost to her final days. Losing her felt like losing the last steady light from my childhood. The funeral home sat on the edge of town, a red brick building surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges and maple trees that had begun turning gold. Everything inside was calm and respectful. Soft music played through hidden speakers. The scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air. Yet all I could focus on was the number printed at the bottom of the estimate resting on the polished oak table in front of me. My sister Patricia stared at it for less than 3 seconds before leaning back in her chair. "I'm not paying for this," she said. Her voice wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. It was simply dismissive, as though she were declining an invitation instead of discussing our mother's funeral. I looked at her, waiting for some sign she was joking. There wasn't one. "Patricia," I said quietly, "she was our mother." She shrugged. "And you've always been the responsible one. You handle it." The funeral director shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I could tell he wished he were anywhere else. I wished the same. "We can split it," I suggested. 50-50. Patricia checked her phone. "I have expenses too, Evelyn." Then she stood up, grabbed her purse, and headed toward the door. "Let me know when everything is arranged." The door closed behind her. Just like that. No discussion. No compromise. No guilt. Just silence. I sat there for a long moment staring at the empty chair she had left behind. Mom had been gone for 48 hours. 48 hours. And somehow Patricia had already found a way to make it about money. In the end, I signed every document myself. I selected the casket. I approved the flowers. I arranged the service. I paid the deposit. When I walked out of the funeral home that afternoon, the October air felt colder than it should have. The receipt folded inside my purse seemed heavier than the payment itself. Over the next several days, I handled everything alone. Family members called to offer condolences. Friends sent casseroles and sympathy cards. Patricia rarely answered her phone. When she did, she always sounded busy. The funeral was held on a cloudy Thursday morning. More than 100 people attended. Former neighbors, church friends, old co-workers, people whose lives my mother had touched decades earlier. They shared stories I had never heard. Stories about kindnesses she had never mentioned. Patricia arrived 15 minutes before the service started. She wore an expensive black suit and spent most of the reception afterward discussing travel plans with a cousin she hadn't seen in years. I watched from across the room. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. By sunset, the guests were gone. The flowers were beginning to wilt. The house felt unbearably quiet. I stayed behind to sort through some of Mom's belongings. Her favorite Bible rested on the small table beside her recliner. I picked it up, intending to place it in a box. Something slipped from between the pages and landed softly on the carpet. I bent down and picked it up. It was an envelope. My name was written across the front in my mother's familiar handwriting. And inside that envelope was the first clue that would change everything I thought I knew about my mother's final wishes. I stood in my mother's living room holding the envelope for several seconds before I opened it. The house was silent except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock near the hallway. That clock had been there for as long as I could remember. Mom used to joke that it knew more family secrets than anyone else. For the first time, I wondered if she had been right. The envelope felt strangely heavy despite containing only a single folded sheet of paper. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it and recognized her careful handwriting. "Evelyn," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are probably doing exactly what you have always done, taking care of everything." I sat down in her recliner and continued reading. She wrote about gratitude, about kindness, about the importance of character when nobody is watching. The words sounded exactly like her. Then one sentence made me stop. "Not everything valuable will be found in my will." I read it again, then a third time. Mom had never been careless with her words. If she wrote something, she meant it. The letter continued with memories from years ago. Family vacations, Christmas mornings, the old lake cabin we rented every summer when Patricia and I were children. Yet beneath those memories, I sensed something else. A message hidden between the lines. At the bottom of the page, she had written one final sentence. "You already know where to look." I stared at those words for a long time. Where to look for what? I searched the envelope again. Nothing else was inside. No instructions. No documents. No explanation. Just that sentence. "You already know where to look." The next morning, I returned to the house with a notebook and a box of coffee from a nearby diner. I told myself I was organizing Mom's belongings, but the truth was different. I was searching, room by room, shelf by shelf. I looked through the places that had mattered most to her. The kitchen, the study, the linen closet she kept arranged with military precision. Hours passed. Nothing. Around noon, I sat at the dining room table and glanced toward the hallway. That was when I remembered the silver key Mom used to wear around her neck. Even during her final months, she rarely removed it. I had asked about it once. She smiled and said it opened something important. When I asked what, she changed the subject. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now the memory felt different, significant. I searched her jewelry box. No key. I checked the bedroom dresser. Nothing. Then I opened the small cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside were photo albums, greeting cards, and an old velvet pouch. My pulse quickened as I loosened the drawstring. A small silver key slipped into my palm. I immediately recognized it. It was the same one she had worn for years. Attached to it was a faded tag with a number stamped into the metal. No name, no address, just a number. I turned the key over in my hand, while dozens of possibilities ran through my mind. Later that afternoon, I called the local bank where Mom had done business for decades. After a brief pause, the manager asked me a question that made my heart skip. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "are you calling about the safety deposit box?" I did not answer immediately. I tightened my grip on the phone and looked down at the silver key resting in my hand. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "A safety deposit box?" I asked. The bank manager paused. "Yes, ma'am. Dorothy Carter maintained one here for many years." My heart began to race. Mom had banked there for decades, but she had never once mentioned a safety deposit box. Not to me. Not that I could remember. "Can I access it?" I asked. "That depends on the ownership documents and the authorization instructions on file," he replied. "You would need to come in so we can verify everything." I thanked him and ended the call. For several minutes, I sat alone at Mom's dining room table staring at the key. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor. Dust particles drifted through the quiet air. Everything felt normal, yet nothing felt normal anymore. The next morning, I drove to the bank shortly after it opened. The building looked exactly as it had for years. Red brick, white columns, American flags moving gently in the autumn breeze. Mom used to bring Patricia and me there when we were children. She believed financial responsibility was one of life's most important lessons. I wondered what she would think if she could see us now. Inside, the manager introduced himself as Thomas Reynolds. He was polite and professional, probably in his late 50s. After reviewing several documents, he disappeared into a back office and returned carrying a thin folder. "Your mother left very specific instructions," he said carefully. "The box can be opened after her passing, but only by the person named in her authorization documents." My stomach tightened. "And who is that?" Thomas looked directly at me. "You, Mrs. Carter." I felt a mixture of surprise and guilt. Surprise because I genuinely had no idea. Guilt because Patricia knew nothing about this. At least, I assumed she did not. Thomas led me through a secure hallway and into the vault area. The room was colder than I expected. Rows of metal boxes lined the walls. He located the correct box and inserted one key. I inserted the silver key Mom had left behind. The lock clicked softly. Then he stepped away to give me privacy. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the box. It seemed impossible that something so ordinary could carry so much mystery. Finally, I lifted the lid. Inside were several documents, a sealed envelope, and an old photograph. The photograph caught my attention first. It showed Mom standing beside a younger version of herself in front of a small farmhouse. Written on the back were the words, "Remember who stayed when things became difficult." I frowned. The message felt intentional, personal. Beneath the photograph sat another envelope with my name written across the front. The same careful handwriting, the same blue ink. I opened it slowly. Inside was a brief note. "Evelyn, if you are reading this, then you found the key. There are truths you do not yet know. Before you make any decisions, speak with Rose Whitman." I read the sentence twice. Rose Whitman had been Mom's closest friend for more than 30 years. They attended church together, volunteered together, and spoke on the phone almost every evening. Suddenly, another memory surfaced. Just weeks before Mom passed away, I had walked into the kitchen and overheard part of a conversation. Rose had said, "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" At the time, Mom smiled and changed the subject when she noticed me listening. I had forgotten all about it until now. I carefully placed the note back into the envelope. Then I reached for the folder beneath it. As I opened it, a single page slipped free. Across the top was a financial institution's letterhead, and near the center of the page was a number so large that I immediately assumed I was reading it incorrectly. I stared at the document for several seconds before the number finally registered in my mind. It was not a few $1,000s. It was not even a few $100,000. The figure listed on the page exceeded $1.5 million. I blinked and looked again, convinced I had misunderstood something. The account summary appeared official. The institution's logo was printed across the top. The dates stretched back years. My mother had maintained the account quietly and consistently for a very long time. I felt a strange mix of disbelief and confusion. Mom had always lived modestly. She drove the same sedan for more than a decade. She clipped coupons. She repaired things instead of replacing them. Nothing about her lifestyle suggested hidden wealth. Yet the paper in my hands told a completely different story. I carefully returned the document to the folder and sat motionless inside the vault room. Questions filled my mind faster than I could answer them. Why had she hidden this account? Why had she never mentioned it? And most importantly, why had she directed me to Rose Whitman before doing anything else? Thomas Reynolds eventually returned to check on me. I thanked him and asked whether he could explain the paperwork. He glanced at the documents, but shook his head politely. The account itself is held through another institution, he said. The records here simply confirm ownership and instructions. I would strongly recommend speaking with the individuals your mother identified. Individuals. Plural. The word caught my attention. Apparently, there was more to this than a bank account. I drove home with the folder secured in the passenger seat. The entire way, memories surfaced one after another. Small moments that had seemed insignificant at the time. Patricia asking Mom detailed questions about property values. Patricia insisting on discussing inheritance during holiday dinners. Patricia becoming unusually interested whenever financial topics appeared. At the time, I had dismissed it as curiosity. Looking back, I was no longer certain. By early evening, I found Rose Whitman's number in my contacts and called her. She answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded tired, but warm. We exchanged a few words about the funeral before I mentioned the letter. Silence filled the line. Not awkward silence. Knowing silence. "I wondered when you would find it," Rose finally said. My pulse quickened. "You knew about this?" Another pause followed. "Your mother trusted me with some things," Rose replied carefully. "Not because she wanted secrets, Evelyn. Because she wanted clarity." I sat down at my kitchen table. Outside, the sun was beginning to set behind the trees. The sky glowed orange and gold. "What does that mean?" I asked. Rose exhaled slowly. "It means your mother saw more than people realized." Her words immediately brought Patricia to mind. Rose continued before I could speak. "Dorothy loved both of her daughters. Never doubt that. But during the last few years, she became concerned about certain conversations." I felt my stomach tighten. "What conversations?" Rose hesitated. The kind that focused more on what she owned than how she was feeling. I closed my eyes. Deep down, I already knew where this was going. Rose told me she would explain everything in person. Then she asked me to come to her house the following afternoon. Just before ending the call, she added one final sentence. "Bring every document you found. There is something in those papers that your sister was never supposed to discover." The next afternoon, I drove to Rose Whitman's house carrying the folder from the safety deposit box on the seat beside me. Rose lived in a small white cottage at the edge of town, surrounded by flower beds that she somehow managed to keep beautiful year-round. My mother loved that house. She used to say it felt peaceful the moment you stepped onto the porch. When Rose opened the door, she greeted me with a tired smile and invited me inside. A pot of coffee sat waiting on the kitchen table. It was obvious she had prepared for a long conversation. After we settled into our chairs, I placed the folder in front of her. Rose looked at it for several seconds before resting her hand gently on top of the documents. "Dorothy spent years thinking about how to handle this," she said quietly. "Much longer than you realize. I listened without interrupting. Rose was not someone who spoke carelessly. Every word seemed measured. Your mother noticed changes in Patricia years ago, she continued. Not dramatic changes. Small ones. Questions about money. Questions about property. Questions about who would inherit what. I lowered my eyes toward my coffee cup. The description sounded painfully familiar. Rose sighed. At first, your mother thought she was simply planning for the future. But eventually she became uncomfortable. A memory surfaced immediately. Thanksgiving dinner nearly 3 years earlier. Patricia had spent half the evening discussing home values and retirement accounts, while Mom quietly changed the subject whenever she could. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Looking back, I saw it differently. Rose reached into a drawer beside the table and removed a sealed envelope. My heart skipped. The handwriting on the front belonged to my mother. She asked me to keep this, Rose said. Only if certain things happened. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The first sentence immediately tightened my throat. Evelyn, if Rose has given you this letter, then events unfolded exactly as I feared they might. I continued reading. Mom explained that she had spent years observing how people behaved when they believed money was involved. She wrote that character often revealed itself during moments of responsibility, not comfort. Then came the sentence that stopped me cold. The person who willingly carried my final burdens would reveal more about their heart than any promise ever could. I read the line twice, then 3 times. Suddenly, the funeral bill came rushing back into my mind. Patricia refusing to help. Patricia walking away. Patricia leaving every responsibility behind. Rose watched my expression carefully. Your mother never wanted a test, she said softly. But she believed life eventually creates one on its own. Tears gathered in my eyes, though I quickly blinked them away. Mom had known. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to prepare. Enough to leave instructions. Enough to protect what mattered to her. I turned to the final page of the letter. At the bottom, beneath her signature, was one final note. It was short, only a single sentence. Yet it changed everything. The account is only part of the truth. Ask Michael Bennett about the second file. For several seconds, I simply stared at the final sentence. Michael Bennett. The name was familiar. Then I remembered. Michael had been Mom's attorney for nearly 20 years. He handled her estate planning, legal documents, and anything involving long-term financial decisions. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Rose watched me without speaking. You knew about him too? I finally asked. She nodded slowly. Your mother wanted everything handled properly. She wanted facts, not arguments, not assumptions. That sounded exactly like Dorothy Carter. She never enjoyed family drama. Whenever conflict appeared, she preferred patience over confrontation. Yet the deeper I went into these discoveries, the more obvious it became that she had been quietly preparing for something. I left Rose's house carrying more questions than answers. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every memory seemed different now. Every conversation from the last few years carried new meaning. By the time I reached my driveway, I had already decided to call Michael Bennett the following morning. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the account, the letters, and Patricia's behavior after Mom's death. Most of all, I thought about the funeral, the responsibility she had abandoned without hesitation. Around 9 o'clock the next morning, I called Michael's office. His receptionist transferred me immediately. Evelyn, Michael said warmly. I was expecting your call eventually. The statement caught me off guard. You were? I asked. Your mother left instructions, he replied. When you were ready, I was authorized to meet with you. We scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. His office occupied the second floor of a historic building downtown. The walls were lined with shelves filled with legal books and framed photographs. Michael greeted me personally and invited me into a private conference room. A thick file rested on the table waiting for us. The moment I saw it, I knew this was the second file Mom had mentioned. Michael folded his hands and looked at me carefully. Before we begin, I need to ask a question. I nodded. Who paid for Dorothy's funeral expenses? I blinked. Of all the questions I expected, that was not one of them. I did, I answered. Michael made a note. Alone? Yes. He nodded again as though confirming information he already suspected. Then he opened the file. Inside were documents, letters, and signed statements. Some were several years old. Others had been updated recently. Michael slid the top document toward me. It was a formal letter written by my mother. As I began reading, I immediately recognized her voice. She explained that the file existed because she wanted her final wishes interpreted through actions rather than promises. She wrote that people often reveal their true priorities when responsibility becomes inconvenient. Halfway down the page, I found another sentence that made my heart stop. The individual who willingly assumes my final expenses without pressure or expectation shall satisfy the primary condition attached to certain private assets. I looked up at Michael. What does that mean? He opened another section of the file. His expression remained professional, but I could see a hint of sympathy in his eyes. It means, he said quietly, your mother created conditions that only one person appears to have fulfilled. For a moment I could not speak. The conference room felt unusually quiet. I looked down at the documents spread across the table and then back at Michael. Only one person? I repeated. He nodded. Your mother established several conditions over the years. None of them involved promises. None of them involved verbal commitments. She believed actions were more reliable. He turned another page in the file and slid it toward me. The document listed a series of instructions written in Dorothy Carter's own words. Some addressed caregiving responsibilities. Others focused on decision-making during emergencies. One paragraph discussed funeral arrangements. Another referenced financial accountability after her passing. As I read, a pattern became obvious. Mom had not been trying to reward anyone. She had been measuring something entirely different. Character. Michael allowed me several minutes to read in silence. Finally, I looked up. Did Patricia know about any of this? He shook his head. Not to my knowledge. I felt both relieved and unsettled by the answer. Relieved because I could not imagine the arguments that would have followed. Unsettled because I knew exactly how Patricia would react once she learned the truth. Michael opened another folder. Inside were records showing periodic updates Mom had made over the last 5 years. Some adjustments were small, others were significant. Every change carried notes explaining her reasoning. Again and again, one theme appeared: reliability, responsibility, trust. Then Michael showed me a document dated just 8 months before Mom passed away. I immediately recognized her signature. Beneath it was a statement that made my chest tighten. In the event that one daughter voluntarily abandons responsibility for my final arrangements, such conduct shall be considered relevant evidence regarding my intentions. I sat back in my chair. Mom had seen this possibility coming. Maybe not the exact circumstances, but close enough to prepare for it. Michael folded his hands. Your mother was an intelligent woman. I gave a small nod. She was. He hesitated before continuing. There is one more issue you should be aware of. My stomach tightened again. There always seemed to be one more issue. Michael explained that several family members had already contacted his office after the funeral. Most simply wanted information. One inquiry stood out. Patricia. According to Michael, she had called twice asking whether any additional assets existed beyond the contents of the will. I stared at him. Twice. Yes. His tone remained professional. She appeared very interested in obtaining details. I looked down at the table. The timing alone spoke volumes. Mom had been gone only days. The funeral flowers had barely faded. Yet Patricia was already searching for assets she believed might exist. Michael slid one final sealed envelope across the table. My name was written on the front. Another letter. Another message waiting from Mom. She instructed me to release this only after you reviewed the file, he said. My hands felt strangely cold as I opened it. The letter was short, much shorter than the others. I read the first sentence and immediately felt my pulse quicken. Evelyn, if you have reached this point, then Patricia has probably begun asking questions she never bothered to ask while I was alive. I continued reading. Then I reached the final paragraph. The words there made me realize that the account, the conditions, and the letters were only the beginning. Because according to Mom, there was still one meeting left to happen, and Patricia was about to be invited. 3 days later, Michael scheduled the meeting. It would take place in the same conference room where I had reviewed Mom's files. According to him, all interested parties needed to be present before the final documents could be discussed. The moment Patricia received the invitation, she called me. "What is this about?" she demanded without even saying hello. I looked out my kitchen window at the bare maple tree in the yard. Autumn was slowly giving way to winter. "I do not know everything yet," I answered truthfully. Michael said Mom left additional instructions. Patricia was silent for a moment. Then she asked the question I had begun expecting. Does this have anything to do with money? I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again. Not a question about Mom. Not a question about her wishes. Money. Always money. I guess we will find out, I replied. The meeting took place the following Tuesday afternoon. When I arrived, Patricia was already there. She sat at the conference table scrolling through her phone. The moment she saw me enter, she straightened in her chair. About time, she said. Michael entered a few minutes later carrying several folders. His calm expression revealed nothing. After everyone settled, he began reviewing the standard estate documents. Most of the information was familiar. The house, personal belongings, savings accounts that had already been disclosed through the will. Patricia listened impatiently. I could see it in the way her fingers tapped against the table. She was waiting for something else. Finally, Michael opened a separate folder. The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. The following documents concern private assets and conditional instructions established by Dorothy Carter, he said. Patricia leaned forward. Private assets? Michael nodded. Yes. He then explained the existence of the separate account and the conditions attached to it. He did not reveal the balance immediately. Instead, he reviewed the requirements Mom had created. Caregiving history, reliability, final arrangements, financial responsibility following her passing. With every condition he described, Patricia's expression became more tense. I remained silent. Michael eventually reached the funeral provision. He read Mom's exact language from the signed document. The person who voluntarily accepted responsibility for her final expenses without demand, negotiation, or expectation would satisfy a primary condition attached to the account. Patricia immediately interrupted. That is ridiculous. Michael calmly continued reading. The records indicate that Evelyn Carter personally arranged and funded all funeral expenses. The room fell quiet. Patricia looked at me. You never told me any of this. I met her gaze. You never asked. For the first time since Mom's death, Patricia had no response. Michael then opened the final document. There is one additional matter, he said. He carefully removed a sealed letter. The envelope bore Mom's signature across the flap. Dorothy instructed that this letter be read only after all conditions had been reviewed. My heart began to pound. Even Patricia appeared nervous now. Michael unfolded the pages and began reading aloud. Mom's words filled the room. She wrote about responsibility. She wrote about trust. She wrote about the difference between claiming love and demonstrating it. Then Michael reached the final paragraph. As he read those last lines, Patricia's face slowly drained of color, and I realized that Mom's final decision was about to become impossible for anyone in that room to ignore. Michael's voice remained steady as he read the final paragraph of my mother's letter. Love is not proven by words spoken when circumstances are easy. Love is revealed by the burdens a person willingly carries when no reward is guaranteed. The room was completely silent. I could hear the faint hum of the heating system somewhere beyond the conference room walls. Michael continued, For this reason, the private account and its associated assets shall pass to the individual who demonstrated responsibility during my final chapter of life and after my passing. Patricia stared at the table. I did not look at her. I could not. My attention remained fixed on the letter. Every word sounded exactly like Mom. Calm, thoughtful, certain. Michael finished reading and carefully placed the pages back into the folder. Then he opened another document. Based on the conditions established by Dorothy Carter and the records available to this office, Evelyn Carter is the sole qualifying beneficiary of the private account and related assets. Nobody spoke. The words seemed to hang in the air between us. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. How much? She asked. The question came out sharper than she probably intended. Michael glanced down at the paperwork. The current value exceeds $1.5 million. Patricia's eyes widened. For a moment, she looked genuinely stunned. Then came disbelief. Then frustration. Then something else. Something that looked very much like regret. This cannot be serious, she said. There has to be some mistake. Michael calmly shook his head. There is no mistake. The documents were reviewed multiple times over several years. Patricia looked toward me. You knew about this? Not until recently, I answered honestly. I learned about it piece by piece, just like everyone else. Her shoulders sank slightly. For the first time since Mom passed away, she seemed less angry than exhausted. Michael spent the next several minutes explaining the legal details. There would be no dispute regarding ownership. The instructions were valid. The conditions had been satisfied. Everything had been documented carefully. By the end of the meeting, even Patricia appeared to understand that the matter was settled. When we finally stood to leave, she surprised me. Instead of arguing, she simply gathered her purse and walked toward the door. Halfway there, she stopped. Without turning around, she said quietly, "I never thought she would do something like this." Neither did I. After she left, I remained seated for a few minutes. Michael gave me privacy. I looked out the window at the busy street below. People hurried along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups and shopping bags. Life continued moving forward, just as it always does. Yet I kept thinking about Mom. Not the account, not the money. Mom. The truth was that she had never been trying to create winners and losers. She had been trying to leave behind a final lesson. Responsibility matters. Character matters. The way people behave when nobody is keeping score matters. Months later, I used part of the funds to establish a community scholarship in Dorothy Carter's name. Another portion supported local programs she cared about deeply. Every decision felt guided by the values she had spent a lifetime teaching. Sometimes I still think about the funeral bill that seemed so unfair at the time. Looking back, I understand something now that I could not see then. My sister believed she was avoiding a burden. In reality, she walked away from an opportunity to honor the woman who gave us everything. And in the end, Mom did not reward sacrifice with promises. She rewarded it with trust.